Edward Latessa received his PhD from Ohio State University in 1979 and is director and professor of the School of Criminal Justice at the University of Cincinnati. Dr. Latessa has published over 150 works in the area of criminal justice, corrections, and juvenile justice. He is co-author of 8 books, including What Works and Doesn't in Reducing Recidivism, Corrections in the Community, and Corrections in America. Professor Latessa has directed over 150 funded research projects, including studies of day reporting centers, halfway houses, and drug programs. He and his staff have also assessed over 600 correctional programs throughout the United States, and he has provided assistance and workshops in 48 states. I don't know what the last 2 states are, but I think you should find a reason to speak there so you can make that a well-rounded 50. Dr. Latessa served as president of the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences from 1989 to 1990. He has also received a ton of awards. I recommend you go view them. It is an incredibly admirable list of awards and distinguishments. One of which is in 2013, he was identified as one of the most innovative people in criminal justice by a national survey conducted by the Center for Court Innovation in partnership with the Bureau of Justice Assistance and the U.S. Department of Justice. So without further ado, Dr. Latessa talking to you about risk needs responsivity.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be here in New York. I've been to Albany several times and done some work, and I know the efforts that you're currently embarking on to try to get people on the same page. Let me start right out by saying I'm not an expert in brain development. That's not the area of work I do. You're going to hear later on this afternoon from someone that will talk about that. My work is mainly focused on, how do we reduce recidivism? How do we change behavior? I've done work with adults. I've done work with juveniles. I'm not an office criminologist. Most of my work is very applied. We have at the university a large corrections institute. We do training and technical assistance all over the country on some of this work as well. I did not send the PowerPoints in advance, but if you email me, my email's up there, edward.latessa@uc.edu, I will send you the PowerPoints and any other material that you would like. I know that some of you will try to write everything down and ignore that, the more anal retentive among us. But trust me, you won't be able to keep up. And they're really just for you to kind of see what I'm talking about. I'd rather you kind of paid attention to me as we go through this material. I want to start by kind of talking about what evidence-based means, because this is the term everyone uses today, right? Every program out there says they're evidence-based. They've been doing the same things for 20 years. They'll still tell you they're evidence-based, right? Go to a conference, people that come to you and want to sell you something, right? None of them say, I don't know where the hell I got this idea from, all right? They all claim that it's based on some evidence. You should understand and know that there are different forms of evidence. The lowest form is anecdotal evidence. It's stories, opinions, testimonials, case studies. It's what most of us rely on. Be honest, it gets you through the work week. If you help a family or a youth, they're staying out of trouble or going to school, parents thank you, you feel good about that. You should feel good about that. But that's only anecdotal evidence. That's all that is. Look at drug courts. I know you have drug courts here in New York. All right, if you've ever been to a drug court graduation, they tell their stories. It's a very moving and powerful experience. But that's only anecdotal evidence. The highest form of evidence is empirical evidence, data, research, results from controlled studies. Problem is, it doesn't always make us feel good. Sometimes it contradicts what we believe. And so most of the things I'm going to talk to you about this afternoon are going to hopefully make a lot of sense. They're going to fit into your world and your view of what you see. But some of them may not. Some of them will contradict some of those challenges. I'm a data guy. I go with the data, where it takes us. My talent, if you will, is taking that research and figuring out how to apply it in real-world situations. So we'll talk about that. We'll have time for questions at the end. If you have questions, you want to write them down. If you really feel the need to ask a question, you know, some people just want to testify or something. If you want to do that, you can jump up and do that. Relax. We'll have a little fun this afternoon. I'm a pretty funny guy, all right? So you can loosen up here a little bit, all right? I know I sound like I'm from New Jersey, but I'm not. I'm from Youngstown, Ohio. We have that same kind of used guys accent that they have in Jersey, so don't throw stones at me for that. All right. Evidence-based practice, evidence-based programs, evidence-based policy, evidence-based decision-making. We use all these terms. We have evidence-based sentencing now, right? All these terms. There's no agreement, right, by academics as to what exactly constitutes that. I like to think of it as evidence-based decision-making. It involves the use of tools and treatments, interventions. Example, you got to do an assessment of the youth, right? You assess them. What are their needs? What are their risk factors? That's a tool. I think you use the YASI here in New York. That's the tool that you use, right? And so you use a tool, right? That doesn't make you evidence-based. Those tools have been around since 1928. There's nothing new about those tools. But without those tools, you're unlikely to implement evidence-based decision-making. It's not just the tools you have, but how you use them. Okay. There's some steps in evidence-based decision-making that's important. The first step is assessment, assessing the youth. Right? And if you stop and think about it for a minute, almost anything you want to fix starts with assessment. I don't mean people, anything. You want to fix your car, and you take it to the shop, right? You want them to ask you what sounds it making, when's it doing it, right? If they said to you, just leave it here, we'll tear it all apart, we'll figure out what's wrong with it. Okay? If you go to the doctor, what's the first thing they do? Blood pressure, temperature, ask you how you're feeling. If you're really sick, they might take some tests. What are they doing? An assessment. If your doctor just pulled out a drawer and said, which color pills do you like? All right? Most of us, you know, we want some assessment done. But it's not just assessing youth. It's assessing your programs and your practices. We do a lot of things in this business that have never, there's no evidence that they work, okay? None, and yet we keep doing them over and over. One of the questions I always would get would be, well, this is all great, but how do we afford it? First thing I say is, well, quit doing stuff that doesn't work, because we do a lot of that, as you'll see. Okay? Second step in evidence-based decision-making is to look at the relevant research. What does it say about what it is you're targeting? Okay? Again, let's say you went to the doctor. You had a heart condition. Your doctor said, I don't know anything about heart conditions, but I got some ideas. I got them from my neighbor, little Italian woman. What are you going to do? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to find another doctor. I want my treatment based on what? Research, clinical trials, evidence. I don't want them making it up as they go along, right? And so designing and funding programs that are based on research. There are existing sources. So there's something called crimesolutions.gov. If you go to that website, you can click on it. You can click on juvenile drug boot camps, for example. And it will tell you they are rated not effective. And it will tell you what the research says. And you can click on multi-systemic therapy, and it will say rated as effective, and it will tell you why. So there are some shortcuts, because I know most of you aren't researchers. You're not spending your time looking at the research. You're spending your time hopefully doing the work with the youth. The third question is to ask yourself is, do we have the available programming specifically to reduce risk? You want to be in the risk reduction business, not just the risk management business. Okay? Hell, we could put kids in institutions. They'll do a better job of managing risk than you ever will. Okay? We want to do what? We want to reduce their risk. We want those kids leaving us better than they came in. Right? And so you have to ask yourself, do we have the programs and interventions? If you don't, you need to look at the research. Maybe you have to improve existing programs. Maybe you have to develop new programs. One of the things I used to see all the time is programs are started and they think they can serve everybody, regardless of the targets for change, regardless of the population. I've never seen a program that's going to do that. Okay? So you actually have to ask yourself, what are we targeting? What's the research say about what we're targeting and how to do it effectively? Fourth step is evaluation. Evaluating the youth, right? It's not just assessing them when they come in the door. We want to know what? Did they improve? Okay. That involves evaluating them. If they, here's what we evaluate. We evaluate knowledge. That's typically what we do in program. The kid, or attendance. If the kid comes for 10 weeks, we stamp graduated on his forehead, right? Or we give him some mindless test and the smart ones figure it out. What we need to do is we have to ask them, we have to put them in situations and say, okay, here's a situation. Give me 3 ways you would get out of it. How would you handle it? Make them demonstrate that they've learned some new skills, some new behaviors. You have to have quality assurance to make sure what it is you're delivering is being done well. And at the end of the day, you have to have some data. You're not going to ever be truly evidence-based unless you have some data. And finally, professionalism and knowledge from the staff. You have to understand this work, and that's partly why you're here, get people on the same page. But I have no illusions that an hour-and-a-half workshop on the principles of effective intervention are going to have that much impact on you. Okay? Because it's not a very effective way to change people's behavior. Right? And so it means training, and here's a key word, coached and skilled. You not only have to train your staff, and by the way, training alone shows very, very little effect. I used to train all over the country on different assessment tools and interventions, and let me tell you how it usually goes. You spend a week with people, a group of people, all day, every day for a week, right? You bond as a group. At the end, you sing Kumbaya. Everybody says they're going to exchange Christmas cards or whatever, right? And then I'd come back 6 months later and look at what they were doing, and I'd wonder what room they were in. Because they weren't putting it to you. Oh, maybe they took a few things they liked or understood, but all the rest of it just didn't fit in very well, right? And so I've learned over the years that if you really want to be effective, you have to coach your staff. It's actually the exact same process you need to use with kids. You think they're going to change their behavior because you're going to talk to them? Because you're going to try to scare them? Because you're going to be nice to them? Right? No, you have to show them how. And how do we learn new skills, by the way? Somebody lecture you about a computer for 8 hours? Is that how you learn to use a computer? No. Okay? You sat down, you did it. Maybe you screwed up. Somebody came and showed you how. They coached you. And now most of them, some of you are young. You're natives to it. But us older folks, we're pioneers. We didn't have them when we were young. And so we had to learn those skills. Okay? And so, your staff need to be coached and they need to be skilled. So, what's the research tell us? That's the $64,000 question. What's the research tell us? As I said here, there's often a misapplication of research. You can find a study to support anything you want. Right? Just go to the internet. All right? There's studies out there that support everything. Right? I mean, as I said here, if you believed every study, you wouldn't eat anything. You just drink a lot of red wine. It's the only thing good for you. Right? Looking at one study can be a mistake. I like to think of this as, what does a body of knowledge tell us about changing youthful offender behavior? What's a body of knowledge? How many of you think cigarette smoking is bad for your health? How many have read all the research that's been published over the last 50 years? Anybody? No. Do you know there's some studies that say it's not that bad? There are. They were funded by the tobacco industry. So why don't we believe those studies? We don't believe those studies because over the last 50 years, there have been hundreds of studies done all over the world by independent researchers who have basically concluded that if you smoke a lot, it can lead to cancer, emphysema, heart disease, the list goes on and on. In other words, we have a body of knowledge. Not one study, not two studies. Okay? We didn't always have that research. It wasn't until '64 that the Surgeon General said smoking was bad for us. In the '30s, they promoted smoking as healthful. It helped digestion. What's changed? Study after study after study. It's an interesting area. Smoking's an interesting area because it's one of those areas where our anecdotal evidence lines up with our empirical evidence, right? I know somebody the other day, and he died in his sleep with a heart attack, and he's fairly young. And the first question I asked my sister was, did he smoke? She said, yeah, he was a heavy smoker. Okay? So we have that anecdotal evidence. We've seen people have health problems because of smoking, but we also have all that empirical evidence. So what does the research tell us about correctional interventions? I'm not going to talk about punishment. And the reason I'm not here to talk about punishment is because it's not very effective in changing behavior. Doesn't mean we're not going to punish people, doesn't mean sometimes we don't feel better, sometimes they deserve it, but it's not a very effective way to change behavior. Okay? And so I'm here to talk about interventions. We know from a large body of research that correctional services interventions can be effective for reducing recidivism for youthful offenders, but not all programs are equally effective. And that's really how I first got into this work. I started assessing programs. I had a tool to assess programs to see how well they lined up with the research. And it became, the question I started asking was, why are some programs effective and other programs aren't? Right? What is it about the effective ones that makes them different? And we actually have long checklists of all kinds of indicators, but these are the principles that they're based on: risk, need, responsivity, and program integrity. Who do we target? What do we target? How do we do it? And how well we do it. That's all you got to remember, 4 things. You want to build your programming, your jurisdiction around those 4 principles. Who, what, how, and how well. That's not that complicated. Okay? Let's start with risk. Risk refers to the risk of reoffending and not the seriousness of the offense. That's important. We often base interventions and penalties on what? Seriousness. Right? Example, you're all low risk. I don't even know you that well, but I can pretty assured most of you are low risk. Why are you low risk? Well, let's go through. Criminal histories? Probably not. You have jobs? Most of you. You educated? Most of you. You have families that care about you and support you? Most of you. You substance abusers? Hopefully not too bad. You hang around with criminals? A little bit, I'll give you that one. Right? But not socially. Right? In other words, you don't have a lot of risk factors. But if you went home tonight and you've been feuding with your neighbor and it's been ongoing, and you get mad, he does something or she does something, you go in the garage and you grab the shovel and you bash him over the head with him, put him in the hospital. That's a violent crime. You're probably going to face some consequences for that. Doesn't matter you're low risk. Seriousness trumps risk. Some kids are in the system not because of their risk, but because of what they did. Okay? We understand that. I understand that. I know that. It's about 20%, at least in my state. Okay? And so, in this context, I'm talking about the risk of reoffending. As a general rule, treatments are stronger if we target higher risk youth, and harm can be done to lower risk youth. That's the essence of the risk principle. Okay? This is what risk looks like actuarially. This is a risk assessment. This is a sample of youth that were assessed with a fourth-generation risk assessment tool. Here's what it tells us. Low risk. 1 out of 10 will recidivate. You know what that means programmatically? You got to put all 10 in the program to get 1. That's what it means. Because you don't know which one's going to fail. You got to put all 10 of them in your program to try to get the 1. That makes no sense financially or otherwise. Moderate risk, about a third are going to recidivate, 3 out of 10. High risk in this sample, a majority, 60%. I came years ago, probably about 10, 12 years ago, and did a workshop for whoever your state people are, department, and they got a bunch of letters in their thing. And I remember at the time, they said they tracked recidivism for kids in your institutions. Their recidivism rate was 85%. All right? So you had nowhere to go but down. And that's not all that uncommon. I know other states have had those kind of rates. All right? 3 elements to the risk principle. First, target youth with a higher probability of recidivism. Second, provide most intensive treatment to higher risk youth. And third, intensive treatment for lower risk youth will increase recidivism rates. Let's talk about them. I think it's important for those of you that work with kids to understand that even with the best programming, you're going to have failures. And when you're dealing with a high-risk group, you're still going to have a lot of failures. You have to understand, that's what the data tells us. I know you want every kid to be successful, but the data doesn't show it. So, even if you reduce recidivism, you'll have high percentages of failure. This is the theory behind the risk principle. You have 100 high-risk youth. You put them in a well-designed program, sufficient duration, and maybe you reduce their recidivism rate to 40%. You have cut recidivism by a third. Right? 20 goes into 63 times. You cut it by a third. If you have 100 low-risk youth, about 10% will fail. That's what the data tells us. Do nothing with them, 10%. You put them in the same program, you'll double their failure rate. That's 100% increase in recidivism. You doubled it. But here's the question. In the end, who had the lower recidivism rate? Well, it's not a rhetorical question. All right. We'll look at the data. Who had the lower recidivism rate at the end? Huh? Low risk. Only 20% of them failed. Even if you screw some of them up, they won't fail as high as the high-risk kids. Okay? I didn't ask you where we got a treatment effect. I asked you who had the lower recidivism rate. We're looking for treatment effects. Here's the mistake we make. We make a mistake when we compare high-risk kids to low-risk kids. It tells us nothing about a treatment effect. We all do it. Researchers have done it for years. Okay? Risk is one of the strongest predictors of outcome, and yet many times we never controlled for it. Who would you rather work with? Who's easier to work with, low risk or high risk? Huh? Come on, low risk, right? High risk are a pain in the ass, right? They show up and say things like, this is going to take long, like they got somewhere to go. Okay? But who are we worried about? The low risk or the high risk? We're worried about the high risk. Okay? I learned a long time ago, if you want to reduce recidivism, focus on the people likely to recidivate. I mean, that's just a simple kind of proposition. Okay? Here's what I'm talking about with a treatment effect. Let's say 10 of you over here, you're not feeling well. You got some kind of bug. 10 of you are feeling great, healthy as hell. You take them to the physician, you sit in the waiting room and hold their hands while they're waiting to see the doctor. All right? Now, let's say some of you feel better after visiting the doctor. You get some medication, some fluid. Let's say a third of you feel better. That's a 30% treatment effect. We reduce the illness by 30%. Anybody over here going to feel better? Huh? Are they? What's probably going to happen over here? Some of them are going to get sick. Let's say a third of you get sick. That's a negative effect. We increased your illness rate by 30%. Negative, positive. But at the end, how many of you are still sick? 70%. How many of you are, right? How many of you are sick? Only 30%. You're much healthier than this group is. It's unfair for me to compare the two. I got a treatment effect here. I got no treatment effect here. I made you worse. Second is provide most intensive interventions to higher risk youth. Sometimes we fail because we do not provide a sufficient dosage of treatment. This is an area of research that's been neglected over the years. Because the question is, what does more intensive treatment mean in practice? Right? We all agree with it. Everybody says, oh yeah, give the high risk more treatment, right? But I can tell you what practice is. Everybody gets the same thing. We're pretty much a one-size-fits-all, all right? Most studies show the longer someone's in treatment, the greater the effects, right? Mental health, substance abuse, we have this literature that says, keep them in treatment. However, we also have research that says effects go down if we keep them too long. Why do you think they go down if you keep them too long? Huh? Let me ask it a different way. Anybody ever do a diet for 2 years? Huh? No, why not? It's too hard, right? We give up. We lose a few pounds and we go, well, my pants are fitting better. I'm done, right? We don't see any light at the end of the tunnel or it's too difficult. We give up. And so we had this dilemma. I went through a very serious illness 8 years ago. And if you ever have to get chemotherapy and radiation, let me tell you what will happen. They'll be very, very prescriptive about the dosage. What happens if they give you too much radiation? It could kill you. What happens if they don't give you enough? It could kill you, right? And so they're very prescriptive. And as I went through all that, I thought, hell, we don't do that. We assess them, we shove it in a file, and we put them in a 12-week program, 8-week program, 10-week program, right? They all get the same thing. Okay? And so started to do a little bit of research. Here's our rules of thumb, by the way. To get a significant treatment effect, for moderate risk, you need about 100 to 150 hours of basically evidence-based programming. Structured programming, where you're teaching them new skills, new ways to behave, practicing, rehearsing. High risk, double it. At least double it. And here's an important finding. 100 hours for high risk will have little effect. Now, I don't have all the answers here. I've done most of this research in residential programming because that's where we can count the hours. But here's some creative ways. There's a judge up in Michigan, in East Lansing, a juvenile court judge, and he created an after-school kind of program for kids, delinquents. And he brings them in every day to this old school that he bought, and they do groups, they feed them, they do rec, they do their homework, they give them treatment. And here's what he does. High-risk kids come Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Moderate-risk kids come Tuesday and Thursday. So with one little schedule change, he separated the moderate risk from the high risk, and he increased the dosage for the high risk. So you have to start thinking about this. You have to start looking at your program. Don't get caught up with the hours. The hours are just guidelines. There are other ways to measure progress that are probably better than hours. Right? We don't count work. We didn't count school. Right? Now in Ohio, we just did a big study. And here's what we found. We didn't have good measures of dosage. We did not have hours. We only had months. But here's what we found. For low-risk kids, this is community, residential, and institutional. The longer they kept them, the higher the recidivism rate. Moderate-risk kids, the longer they kept them, they doubled their recidivism rates. Look at this. More than doubled their recidivism rate. But look at high risk. they went down. Now, I don't want you to interpret this as, okay, we got to keep high-risk kids over a year. I don't want you to interpret it that way. Okay? What it's telling us is they needed more time to get the dosage in. I've done it in 4 or 6 months. I mean, there's ways to do it. You just have to start looking at that schedule, doing groups every day, on weekends, advanced practice. I mean, you have to start doing creative things to get that dosage in. But that's what we found. Now, this is a study we did involving adults. It did not involve juveniles. But here's what I want to show you. For low moderate, it went down, but it went up. For moderate, it went down and it went up. But look at high. It kept going down. So again, we see giving them too much can make them worse. So the third element of the risk principle is intensive treatment for lower risk youth will increase failure rates. 3 reasons, we believe. First, low risk youth learn antisocial behavior from high risk youth. You know this. Your mothers knew it. If you're a parent, you know it. You worry about who your kids hang around with, right? Any of you have teenage kids? No? So you want them to hang around with gang members and drug use? Why not? Maybe your kid will rub off on them. No, we never do that as a parent. By the way, we do it all the time in the juvenile justice system. We put kids in detention for a week to teach them a lesson for some minor thing or they're low risk. Who are we putting them in with? High-risk kids, right? And the other reason we increase failure rates is we disrupt their pro-social networks. So let's say a kid in your neighborhood that's friends with your son or daughter gets sent to juvenile hall or detention for a couple weeks. And they get out, and what do you tell your son or daughter? Go down and see how they're doing? Is that what you say? No, what do you say? I don't want you hanging around with them anymore, right? We've cut them off from pro-social people. Right? Again, you're all low risk. You're all low risk. If you committed a crime and if I took you right now and put you in the best correctional treatment facility we could find, right, for 6 months, because that's how long they usually last, how many of you would lose your jobs? How many of your family would have difficulty without you for 6 months? How many of your neighbors would have a welcome home from the correctional treatment facility reception for you when you got out? There'd be a sign at the street, all right. It wouldn't be welcome back. In other words, I wouldn't reduce your risk. I'd give you some new risk factors. And third, of course, is increasing reporting and surveillance leads to more violations and more revocations. These are teenagers. These are kids that do things they shouldn't. Most of them, grow out of it. They're in the PO in the world that doesn't think if they just had a lower caseload, they'd be more effective. What does the research say? Smaller caseloads, more technical violations. And I tell everyone, my wife and I, we have four kids. That meant we had a caseload of 2. They still did shit they weren't allowed to do. All right? So you're not going to get it low enough. All right? Forget about that. All right? What do we see in the data? Average treatment effect, high risk, low risk. Ohio study, low risk that were kept in the community, low risk that were put in residential, low risk that were put in institutions. Moderate risk, increased. And even the community. They did better in the community in this study. They haven't always done better in our other studies. And I think it's really about the quality of the programs that they're getting in those residential and institutional programs. But you can see very harmful effects here when we put low-risk kids and moderate-risk kids in. A couple other findings from the Ohio study. Here's an important one for you. We found that placing low-risk youth in substance abuse programs significantly increased their failure rate. Putting kids in, mostly who smoke marijuana or drink. That's what 90% of them are here for. And we're putting them in with some high-risk kids. You wouldn't put your kids in with them. Okay? So I'm just showing you, you get a lot of harm when we put low-risk kids in with high-risk kids. And we're not saying low-risk kids don't need anything. Okay? They may need some intervention. They certainly, they may need to be held accountable for what they did. But there's other ways to do that. We can do restorative justice programs, minimal programs, things like that to get them out of the system. Because once they're in, it just builds. It just builds. All right, to understand the need principle, we need to understand the body of knowledge related to risk factors. And I'll be honest, this is where a lot of folks go wrong. A lot of programs go wrong here. I think there's two reasons. First, sometimes our training gives us a very narrow perspective of delinquent and criminal behavior. What do I mean by that? If you're trained in substance abuse, what are you looking for when you get a kid referred to you? Substance abuse, that's what you're looking for, right? When you find it, bingo, that's it. Mental health. You're trained in mental health, what are you looking for? Mental health. Read those psychiatric and psychological reports. They all sound, suffers from depression, anxiety, conduct disorder, right? Even though we have almost no evidence, most of those are highly correlated with criminal behavior, right? The other reason we go wrong here, quite frankly, is because I think everybody thinks they're an expert. And I don't mean you. Most of you are experts, but I mean everybody. How many of you, when your family or friends find out you work with these kids, tell you how to do your job? Come on, you've gotten it, right? They tell you, give you advice, unsolicited. They'll tell you what you need to do to straighten these kids out. I get it all the time. I was on a plane once. I was flying to Boise, Idaho, and I was seated next to this elderly woman, one of these chatty types, didn't take a hint. And she asked me what I did for a living, and I told her. I made the mistake of telling her. And for 4 hours, she told me how to solve the crime problem in America. Didn't get off in Salt Lake, stayed right on with me to Boise. It's okay. Now I just tell them I'm a proctologist. They leave me alone. So, I'm not going to go through all the research. I'm going to cut right to it. Talk about the major set, starting with antisocial attitudes, values, beliefs, and cognitive emotional states. What are cognitive emotional states? Rage, anger, defiance, criminal identity. Got kids that are angry? Got kids that think they're a thug, act like a thug? Sure, it's their identity. That's much different than someone whose identity is, I made a mistake. Okay. Pro-criminal attitudes and values and beliefs are what people think, not how they think. They're the content of thought. These are things that we listen for. Negative expressions about the law. Everybody does it. I got caught. It should be legal. Okay. Negative expressions about conventional institutions, rules, authority. Things like school and work. What do they say? School not for me. Okay. Negative expressions about self-management and their ability to achieve through conventional means. They don't know how to get there by doing the things that most of you have done to get there. We have to teach them that. And of course, lack of empathy and sensitivity toward others. They don't see who they hurt. And I don't mean just their victims. It could be their family, right? What do they say? If I want to use drugs, I'll use drugs. It's my business, right? They don't see that it's hurting people around them. They minimize and neutralize their behavior. They deny responsibility, right? You hear things like, I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. My favorite is the some dude defense. Right? Some dude told me I could drive that car. Right? We're looking for some dude, by the way. If we ever catch him, crime's going down 30%. But he moves around a lot. Deny of injury, admit the act, but minimize the harm. I've been beat up worse. Yeah, I stole their stuff. They had insurance. Those people had a lot of money. Okay. Deny the victim. Right. Reverse the role and blame the victim. Right? They needed it. Right? They disrespected me. They this, they that. They have a whole list of reasons. System bashing. Those who disapprove are immoral, hypocritical, or criminals themselves. And the gang member mantra. Live by a different code. Right? Demands of society are sacrificed for more immediate. Right? Me and my boys don't roll that way. We don't follow your rules. Where's that start? Right here. Attitudes, values, beliefs. Okay. 2, pro-criminal associates and isolation from pro-social others. It's not just knowing people that get in trouble. Most of us have known people that got in trouble. It's the absence of pro-social people. I always tell POs, when you assess a kid and you ask them who they got in trouble with, ask them who they don't get in trouble with. Why? Because you got to build that network of pro-social people around them. All right? If there is none, you got to create some. Maybe get a mentor or reach out to a teacher or someone, or maybe it's you. All right? Because we know this. And the more I do this work, the more I realize it's really about relationships and people. Okay? Most of us are where we're at, not because of some program, but because of the people around us. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. I put this together. This is a sample example of what we typically do in probation with kids. Restrict associates, set and enforce curfews, and ban hangouts. Those are typical supervision techniques. Here's the problem. They're all risk management techniques. They're not risk reduction techniques. Because what happens when we take away the supervision? Who do they go to? Same people, same places, same things, right? And so I put a little list together. You probably do all these things, but, that should be youth. Teach youth to recognize and avoid negative influences. Practice new skills, all right? They have to practice and rehearse how to be assertive, for example. Teach them how to have a relationship without getting into trouble. Maybe it's their cousin they get in trouble with, or their brother. They never going to see him again? Come on. Give me a break. No, we have to teach them, how to have that relationship without the trouble that comes along with it. Identify pro-social. Train family. Here's one I always like. Set a goal of 1 new friend per month. There was a day reporting center once I assessed it. That's what they did. They made the kids bring somebody every month. They hated it. One of them, I was there once, he brought his grandma. But that was a good thing because grandma didn't approve of what he was doing. And grandma wasn't afraid to tell him. And grandma talked to those other kids. And I thought, right, what he does, he stays away from grandma when he's doing this stuff. What are they trying to do? Strengthen those relationships. Right? So those are cheap things you can do. That doesn't even cost you much to do that kind of stuff. 3, temperament and antisocial personality patterns, including weak socialization. Acting impulsively. You're going to hear about brain development and why and how kids often act without thinking. But that's a common trait among a lot of offenders, adults as well. They tend to be very impulsive. I interviewed a guy the other day on parole. And I said, are you working? And he said, no, I quit my job. I said, why not? He said, I wasn't getting enough hours. I said, how many are you getting now? And he said, none. I said, most of us don't quit our job till you got another job lined up. You're going backwards. You went from 20 to 0. But he showed them. It's that kind of thinking that gets him into trouble. Most of us would say, I got to have another job. I got bills to pay. I got kids to feed, right? And so it happens with a lot of offenders have that impulsivity. Kids, are they adventurous, pleasure-seeking, restless aggressiveness? Sure. Egocentrism. We think it's low self-esteem. That's a myth. It's high self-esteem. You listen to high-risk kids. It's about them. Mm-hmm. I remember years ago, we were testing a new assessment tool in Ohio. At the time, we had a reception center. And so when kids got sent to the state, their first week was sent at the reception center, and they gave them a big battery of assessments and all that, right? And so we were testing a new tool. So we went up and we interviewed kids. Now, I want you to think about this. Most of these kids were 14, 15, 16 years old. Most of them have never been away from home in their life. And they're in an institution. Some of them are going to be there for 3 years or more. So think about how you would have felt at 15. Somebody plucked you out of your family, right? Most of us would have been scared and worried. So we had a question we asked these kids. On a coolness scale, With 1 being not cool at all and 10 being really cool, how cool do you see yourself? The kids that scored high risk, boys and girls, you know what their typical answer to that was? 11 and a half, baby, I'm off the chart. Right? I'm sitting there thinking, you're in an institution. That's your self-image, though. Right? I knew then that the egocentrism was right? Because if you're and just being egocentric doesn't make you criminal, by the way. We'd have to lock all the judges up in this country. But if you're egocentric and you think you can do no wrong, you blame others, you hang around with people that get into trouble all the time, you think what you do is okay. Now your risk goes way up because you have no reflection. You have no insight on what you did wrong because it's always somebody else's fault. Below average verbal intelligence, mostly boys. They can't articulate needs well, a taste for risk, and weak problem solving and lack of coping and self-regulation skills. They get into situations, quite frankly, they don't know how to get out of them. You have a lot of skills. You've learned them over the years. They've been reinforced, and when you get into it, you know how to get out of it. They don't. They do what they always did. Right? They do what they always do. Somebody gets in their face, what happens? Somebody's getting an ass whooping. Okay? Even if they go to detention, so what? They got a story to tell. Okay? They got a lot of reinforcement from that behavior. 4, history of antisocial behavior, evident from a young age in a variety of settings, involving a number and variety of different acts. Right? They start. The younger they start, the more things they do. And it's not just in the streets. It could be at school, it could be in the family, right? They're antisocial behavior. Family factors that include criminality. The father's been in prison, the mother's in prison. That's a risk factor. But here's the problem with it. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to change it? You're not. It helps explain why Johnny's sitting in front of you, but what are you going to do, bust them out? But these other ones, low levels of affection, caring, and cohesiveness, poor parental supervision and discipline, and outright neglect and abuse. Who do parents call? By the way, if you supervise kids or work with kids, who's the mother called to fix her kid? You guys. That happens all the time. Why? What's it tell you? They don't know what to do. We call that learned helplessness. They've learned to give up. Low levels of educational, vocational, or financial achievement. Low levels of involvement in pro-social leisure activities. And abuse of alcohol and drugs. This is what we call the major set. There are other risk factors. There are minor risk factors that contribute. But when we look at meta-analysis, studies of risk factors, these show up with the strongest correlation to delinquent and criminal behavior. I put this little list together for you for a reason. Here you got the factor, the risk, and the dynamic need. So there's a history of antisocial behavior. It started early and it continued. What's the need? Build non-criminal alternative behaviors in risky situations. When do they get in trouble? Break it down. Develop a plan and practice with them how the next time they get into that situation, they have a way out. They may not use it, but at least you know they practiced the skill. I interview inmates all the time coming out of prison. They all say the same thing. I hate this place. I'm never coming back again. I learned my lesson, and I'm thinking, well, you've been here 3 times before, right? And then I'll say to them, what are you going to do when you get into a certain situation? And they'll look at me and they'll go, well, I'm not going to get in that situation. I go, why not? They go, well, my friends know I'm going straight. I'm like, how do they know? Is it on the internet or something? You know what I know? They don't have a plan. They've not rehearsed it. They've not practiced it. All right? And when they get out, and they run into those friends or whatever it is, or they have poor coping skills, and they get jammed up, they're going to what? Get high, do stuff they shouldn't, all right, and end up in trouble. So, same with kids. They have to practice it. But I put this together for a reason. History, personality, cognitions, associates. Family, school and work, leisure, recreation, and substance abuse. But here's where I want to be crystal clear to you. People like myself that study these things believe that these four right here run through these four. These are what we call the big four. They're the strongest. Unfortunately, here's where we start. Right? We put them in a drug program. We put them in, get them back in school. Right? But what happens here? He thinks what he's doing okay. He hangs around with people that don't do it. Right? He has no behavioral skills. Right? So what happens? He gets in trouble again at school. His friends pick him up and they go get high after the program. Right? And so the mistake I think we make often is we start here instead of starting here. I think you have to teach them the skills they need and then teach them how to apply them. And because they're not good at that. They learn it in the context you teach it, but they don't learn how to apply it in different settings. You have those skills, you don't even know them. Some of you are good problem solvers. You're good problem solvers at home with your children. You're good problem solvers with your friends. You're good problem solvers at work. You don't even know you're doing it. They learn what you teach them, and then they don't see how do we do it in different settings. So you have to do what? Practice with them. Right? I'm going to skip this for time. This brings us to the need principle. By assessing and targeting criminogenic needs, we can reduce recidivism. What are criminogenic needs? Two types of needs, what we call criminogenic and non-criminogenic. The way to think of criminogenic are dynamic risk factors. Why are they criminogenic? They're correlated, highly correlated with delinquent behavior. That's why they're criminogenic. And we can change them. Not all risk factors can be changed. We can change these. We can work on associates, friends, substance abuse, lack of empathy, impulsive behavior, problems in the family. These are non-criminogenic: anxiety, low self-esteem, creative ability, medical needs, physical conditioning. People have those needs. Problem is, they're just not highly correlated with criminal behavior. Anxiety, that's always my favorite. I actually like anxious criminals. I interviewed a guy once who was a bank robber, and I said to him, what was it like to rob a bank? And he said, I was so scared the first time I did it, I could hardly go in the bank. I said, well, you robbed like 10 banks. He said, yeah, I started taking Valium after that. It got a lot easier. Right? This is the Christopher Columbus style of program design. When he set out, he didn't know where he was going. When he got there, he didn't know where he was. When he got back, he didn't know where he'd been. And he came 4 times, and he did it on state money. Okay? So remember that. Okay? These are not criminogenic needs. Okay? Here's one. Dance program gets juveniles moving on the right track. I'll read what it says. There in a small, secure, concrete area, young male offenders dance their way toward a new outlook on life. So they're going to dance their way out of their antisocial behavior. Drum circles. I'll read, they were trying to promote this to Georgia Department of Corrections. I'll read you what it said. She introduced the first drum circle in a New Zealand prison, and she describes it as wow. That's the data they have right there. Wow. The staff was amazed because most clients continued to drumming for 2 hours without stopping to smoke. It doubled as a smoke cessation program. Now, they do it with juveniles too, all right? Just so you know, it's not just adults. They're drumming their way out of their behavior. Okay? Here's one. Circus clown trains troubled teens. Actually, this is a very useful skill because they'll be able to climb fences and get away from you cops a lot quicker if they get this skill. All right? Handwriting formation therapy aims to reform juveniles in Texas. So you just fax her your kid's handwriting and she'll tell you how to fix them. Okay? It's based on the same theory as the drum circle. It's a horseshit theory, but they do have a theory behind it. And let me say this. Let me make a point in saying this. I think, and some of these things, I make fun of them, but you know, there are things that are activities, and you need to do activities with kids, right? You can do art classes, you can do all kinds of things. They need that. But don't confuse activities with your core programming. Your core programming is targeting risk factors and is designed to reduce their risk. Your activities are designed to keep them busy, maybe get them excited about something, maybe they hang around with people that are pro-social, but that's a very indirect way to change their behavior. So distinguish between them. Here's our correlations with effect sizes for youthful offenders. So, fear of punishment. What's the correlation? Increased recidivism. Don't think we do that? We do it all the time. Scared straight programs. Take them down to jail or take them to Sing Sing. Scare the hell out of them a little bit. Can't hurt. There's not one study that's ever shown it reduced recidivism. Most of them show increases. Why? Well, first of all, they go back to school. They're the cool kids that went to the prison and jail. Some of them connect with those guys. Okay? Bond antisocial peers together, right? Things like wilderness programs. We take these low, moderate, and high-risk kids and send them to upper state. Oh, we are in upper state New York, right? We'll send them even further upper state New York, right? Let them learn to live off the land and chop wood, right? We bond them together. We call those gangs in Ohio. I don't know what you call them. My favorite, of course, is physical activity. Get them in really good shape, right? This is kind of the boot camp model. I don't know where we got that idea. We ought to have couch potato programs. I don't really want them in really good shape, by the way. I remember I interviewed a young man in a boot camp once, and I asked him, I said, what have you gotten out of the program? And he leaned in my face. He said, I'm in the best physical condition of my life, sir. I thought, good, he can run me down and kick my ass even quicker now. Oh, you guys still run a lot of adult boot camps, don't you? Oh, okay. I don't care, yeah. All right, this is an important chart. What it's showing us is the more criminogenic needs you target, the stronger the effects on recidivism. And I think there's a simple reason for it. Most kids are not high risk because they have a risk factor. They're high risk because they have multiple risk factors. Right? Think about that for a minute. And you say, well, he uses drugs. Okay, well, who's he use them with? Where does he get them from? Why does he think it's okay to use drugs? Go down the list. Is he impulsive? Is he, lack of self-control? You go down the list. They got a whole bunch of risk factors. What do? We put them in these silo programs and we target one thing and we don't get strong effects. Okay? Risk factors are often interrelated. All right, what to change and why? Criminogenic targets reduce risk for recidivism. Non-criminogenic targets may reduce barriers, but not risk. There's a lot of barriers that exist. We'll talk about them. We talk about specific responsivity. But we get confused. We think the barriers are going to really help them. All the barriers are designed to do is to get to the risk factors. Get them out of the way so we can get to the risk factors. Okay? All right, assessment's the engine that drives effective interventions. You need it to meet the risk principle. You need it to meet the need principle. It can help help you with decisions, and if you use a good tool, you can reassess a kid. These are some common tools: the YLSCMI, Youth, the YAZI, and we have a new one in Ohio. So this is the LSI. It covers 42 items. This is the YAZI wheel. I think you guys use this in the state. And in Ohio, we went about it a little different. We developed a whole series of tools at different stages of the system. So we have a diversion tool to divert kids out. We have a detention tool to divert them out of detention. We have a disposition tool, a residential tool, and a reentry tool. This is what judges see in Ohio. They get a speedometer that kind of shows where the kid is in terms of risk, and then they get all the different domains, and then they get case plans and all that. So all these tools pretty much operate the same way. I want you to understand different types of risk factors. It's two basic types: static ones and dynamic ones. Static risk factors are those things related to risk that you can't change. Right? Dynamic ones are things related to risk you can change. I was Sitting in the airport once and reading the paper, and this caught my eye. These are the risk factors that increase your chance of a heart attack. And I'm in training for a heart attack, so I decided to brush up on these risk factors. First three: family history, age, gender. Good risk factors. Father had a heart attack, young age, got a risk factor. Over 50, man, even higher. Can you change them? Nothing you can do about it. Right? But we have some other ones. These are dynamic. You have an inactive lifestyle, you're overweight, high blood pressure, smoking, high cholesterol. Let's say you have them all. You go to your physician, what are they going to have you work on? The dynamic ones, right? So let's say you lower them all. Does it mean you won't have a heart attack? No, you might still keel over, right? We see these joggers keel over all the time. That's why I don't exercise. Okay? But as a group, if we all did it, and we all had those risk factors, we could cut our rates by 20, 30%. That's what actuarial prediction's all about. Right? It's based on group data. But here's the point I want to make. Just because these are the ones you can change, you cannot ignore the static ones. After all, are you worried about having a heart attack when you're 20? Even if you have all these things, you're not worried about it, right? It's very rare. It's not till 50 kicks in. So my point is, good assessment tools look at both static and dynamic risk factors, okay, to calculate risk. So if you used to be a heroin addict, you've been clean for 10 years. I've never been a heroin addict. Your risk is higher than mine, even though you've been clean. I could start using, but the chances are much lower than yours because you have a history of that behavior. You know what it's like. Okay? That static risk factor gives her higher risk than it does me. So I want you to understand these factors, but while there are two types of basic risk factors, there are two types of dynamic risk factors. Acute ones that can change quickly. What can change quickly with a kid? Get them back in school, right? Go back to school. Get them back in Monday. Starts back in school. May not do well, but he get back in school. For adults, it's things like employment. Get a job. You get a job just like that. You start on Monday. You went from unemployed to employed. But guess what? A lot of dynamic risk factors are stable. Think I'm going to change how you think overnight? Think I'm going to make you less impulsive overnight? Change who you hang around with? No. It's going to take time and practice and work. And I'm telling you this because we sometimes expect, to reassess a kid in a couple weeks and see some big changes. Okay? I think it's also related to the dosage issue. Some of those risk factors take more dosage than others. I don't have the answers for that. We're doing some of those studies now. Okay? All right, let's talk about responsivity a little bit. Okay? Hold on a second. Two types. The responsivity principle, there's two types of responsivity. General responsivity and specific responsivity. General responsivity is that most youths respond to programs that are based on cognitive, behavioral, and social learning theories. Specific responsivity is youth can learn differently and have certain barriers that should be addressed so they are more likely to succeed in programs. Some specific responsivity factors are pretty common. Transportation. That's a common one. Language. Kid only speaks Spanish. Right? We got to have staff that can communicate with them. Right? That's a barrier. Right? That's a barrier. Right? Other ones. So think about what gets in the way of a youth benefiting from a program. Come on, you work with kids. What gets in the way sometimes? Motivation, there's a big one. Very dynamic. It's not a risk factor. It's a barrier. Right? Think about it. Right? I'm motivated every morning. I wake up with 3 same goals every day. Lose weight, get in shape, treat people better. Those are my 3 goals. I had a big buffet breakfast this morning. I'm going to be tired tonight. I'm not going to exercise. And as for treating people better, there's always tomorrow. Right? Kind of leaks out of me all day long. Right? Turn into a grumpy old man. Right? So motivation. Here's the other problem with motivation. I can be motivated, but I don't know how to do it. I like to do brain surgery. Would you let me practice on you? No. Why? I don't know how. I don't have the skill. I make a simple one. Your car breaks down. I've never fixed a car, but I said, I'll take it apart. You gonna let me do that? Only if you're stupid, right? Because I don't know how to do it. I want to do it. So don't confuse motivation with knowing how. Everybody's get trained on motivational interviewing. The problem with it is it doesn't go to the next step, which is actually show them how to do it. Other things like intelligence. You get low-functioning kids, huh? You can't go fast with them. You got to slow down with them. Different relationship. Mental health. There's a barrier, right? One you have to work through, right? Maturity for kids. I remember once I interviewed a kid at DYS, and he's a big kid. I mean, he was like 6'4", just a huge kid. And he was about 16 years old, but I could tell something was off with him. So I had a question I asked him. I said, before you came into the institution, what time would you get up on a Saturday morning? Well, what's a typical 16-year-old answer to that? Noon, yeah. He said 8 o'clock. I said, why 8 o'clock? He said, that's when the cartoons come on. And I knew right then, this kid wasn't very sophisticated. He's a little slow. You can't put him in with some sophisticated, high-risk kids. They're really going to take advantage of him, right? And so that's what responsivity is really all about. All right, I want you to think of 3 speeches that have changed your life, not including this one. I'm going to give you a minute to think of 3 speeches that have changed your life. Okay, that's enough time. Most of you can't do it anyway. I can hear you thinking. Anybody got 3 speeches that changed your life? Anybody got a speech? What do you got? Martin Luther King, I Had a Dream. If you heard that speech, could have changed how you looked at hope or race. Powerful speech. What else? Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. There you go. I wasn't there, but I hear it was a good speech. What else? JFK, Ask Not, right? People heard that and joined the Peace Corps, devoted themselves to public service, a powerful speech. Those are famous speeches, but most of us really can't say how they changed our life. Let's be honest. I got another question for you. I want you to think of 3 people that have changed your life. Who are the people? Who are the people that changed your life? Your significant other. There you go. What you got? Yeah. My mom. Mom? Professor? Sure. Wife? Parents? I had a guy the other day had 3 ex-wives that changed his life. Said he wasn't getting married again. He was just finding a woman that hated him and buying her a house. Who else you got? Come on. Missing some big groups. Children, grandparents, aunt, uncle, mentor. Why are you doing what you're doing? Who influenced you to do it? Who'd you want to be like? Who saw something in you? Maybe a teacher or a coach. All right? I mean, I'm not trying to confuse you here. I'm trying to get you to see how much more powerful social learning is than talk therapy. So you think they're delinquents because they never got any good advice. No, they never got any good advice from you. That's why they're delinquent. That's not an effective way to change people's behavior. We have to do what? We have to show them how. General responsivity, I also call the treatment principle. The most effective interventions are behavioral. Behavioral interventions have some attributes. First, they focus on current factors that influence behavior. What are current factors? You're not going to school. You get high all the time. You hang around with the wrong crowd. You're out all night, right? You think what you do is okay. You get high whenever you can. Those are current risk factors versus what? The past. Why? I can't change the past. Oh, it may be a barrier. It may explain why you're sitting there. What am I going to do? Your father abandoned you when you were little. That may explain why you're running with the wrong crowd. What the hell am I going to do? I got to focus on the current risk factor, which is you're hanging around with the wrong crowd. Not on having you come to grips with your father. And we can talk about it. Maybe you need therapy and all that, but it's not going to reduce your recidivism very much. Okay? I see this all the time in the juvenile system. Okay? This pseudo-therapeutic model we want to do, and kids don't come out of there with the skills they need to stay out of trouble. Second, it is action-oriented, not talk-oriented. What does that mean? That means the kids are actively engaged in learning new skills, new behaviors, right? And it's a myth they don't have skills. They have skills. Using drugs, stealing, cheating, skipping school. They're pretty good at that. We want to teach them what? The pro-social skills. The alternatives to that behavior. And staff follow some core correctional practices. These are basically behavioral strategies. Why behavioral interventions? Because when we look at the data, we see much stronger effect sizes for behavioral interventions versus non-behavioral interventions. What are non-behavioral interventions? Things like drug education. Take a bunch of delinquents that use drugs and educate them about drugs. That's really a dumb idea when you think about it. We need to teach them what? We need to first target their thinking about it. We need to make sure they're being supervised. We need to get them to understand the harm that it does to them and the people they love. We have to practice refusal skills. We need to make it very interactive. Or we can just stand up there and tell them how bad it is for them. Develop insight. Talk therapy. It all falls under that non-behavioral category. We get very small effects from that. These are core correctional practices. Everybody should be trained. Anybody that works with the kids should be trained on them. Effective reinforcement, effective disapproval, effective use of authority without being authoritarian. Quality interpersonal relationships, right? Why? You more likely to listen to somebody that you think cares about you? Yeah, sure. Sometimes you got to teach staff how to do this. Okay? Cognitive restructuring, anti-criminal modeling, structured learning and skill building, and problem-solving techniques. Staff need to have these skills so whenever they interact with the youth, they can use these core practices. Why? Because when we look at the data, we see much stronger effects when you use these core practices versus when you don't. All right. What kind of behavioral models are commonly used with kids? 3 basic types. Structured social learning, where new skills and behaviors are modeled. Family-based approaches that train family, and cognitive behavioral approaches that target criminogenic needs. Let's start with social learning, structured social learning. First of all, you should know, social learning is not a theory of criminal or delinquent behavior. It's a theory of human behavior. It's the process through which we acquire our attitudes, our values, our beliefs, and our behavior from people around us. You can all name people very quickly who influenced you. It's a complex process. It's not a complex it's an easy concept to get. How many of you have children? How many of you turned into your parents when you had children? You turned into your mother. That was the last person you were probably going to be at 14, right? Am I right? Yeah. I have 4. My youngest said once when she's a parent, she's going to let her kids do whatever they want. I said, you go right ahead, Allie. You just be home at 10 o'clock. Okay? I turned into my dad. I said things I swore I'd never say. You born in a barn? You think money grows on trees? I'll give you something to cry about. That was always my favorite one. I said to my son Michael one time, I said, Michael, do I look like Rockefeller? He said, who the hell's this Rockefeller guy, Dad? I said, I'm sorry, do I look like Bill Gates? Okay? That's social learning. The problem with social learning is we don't just learn good things from other people, do we? We learn bad things from other people. That's why it's structured social learning. Family-based approaches, common with kids. These are some different models: functional family, MST, teaching family, strengthening family program. I don't have it on the list. There's a real good one that Boys Town developed called, what the hell is it called? Not parenting wisely, but very good. A lot of data behind it, very behavioral, right? So, but I want to show you what the data tells us. The data tells us, on average, from meta-analysis, reductions in recidivism about 21%. That's pretty good. But a lot of variation in the data. Some studies had negative effects. Some studies had very positive effects. Right? Because remember, what we're looking at is we want to know which programs have the strongest effects. What do they look like? Well, guess what? They targeted higher risk families. They targeted criminogenic needs. And they used behavioral techniques. Because I can tell you what most family interventions are. We bring the parents in, or mother in, and tell her what we're going to do with her kid. That's common. Okay? And so when we do use these techniques, we need to make sure we're focused on what? The principles of effective intervention. Because what I'm trying to get you to see is whether you use a family approach or another approach, following the principles increases your effect size. Let's talk about cognitive behavioral intervention. How many of you are familiar with CBT? All right, a few of you. This is the theory behind it. Thinking affects behavior. Antisocial, distorted, unproductive, irrational thinking can lead to antisocial and unproductive behavior. Thinking can be influenced, and we can change how we feel and behave by changing what we think. Again, it's a complex concept. It's not a complex process. Okay? Let's take an example. Let's say you're leaving here and you're going, I don't know, Buffalo or something, and the speed limit's 65. You're doing 75. What are some of the thoughts you have that allow you to drive over the speed limit? Everybody else is doing it. There's one. I'm a good driver. I won't get caught. Right? What else? Huh? I don't have a red car. Another, I won't get caught. What else? Come on. Huh? Keeping up with the flow. Right? I don't see any cops. I won't get caught. What's another one we commonly think when we're going 10 miles over the speed limit? I'm in the 10-mile limit. Yeah, there's a good one, right? I'm in the 10-mile limit. Everybody's doing it. I won't get caught. I'm not really hurting anybody. I'm a safe driver. How about an egocentric one? I'm in a hurry. I'm late. My time's important. All right. We all do it. You're driving 75. What's influencing your behavior, by the way? Some thoughts that you have that basically say it's not that big a deal. Everybody's doing it. So there you go, 75, and there in the median is the New York State Highway Patrol. What is your first thought as you go by? Huh? What's your first thought? Oh, shit, that's your first thought, right? Nobody's thinking, I'm in the 10-mile limit, right? Now you're not so sure what the limit is, right, if there is a limit. So we're thinking that. What else are we thinking? What are we hoping? Hope he gets the other guy. Yeah, we're thinking that. Hope he doesn't see us. Some of you are thinking of excuses. Some of you in law enforcement are putting a badge over your driver's license, right? That's real criminal thinking, by the way, right? So our heart's beating fast. We're hoping he didn't see us, gets the other guy, trying to think of excuses. Can I get off at the ramp, right? All of that's going through our mind. Lights go on, pulls you over. It's quota week. They're writing you the ticket. What's your first thought often when they're writing you that ticket? It's quota week. I got to go, yeah, no, but what are we thinking? Who are we blaming? Them, he's a jerk, right? How come he's not getting real criminals, right? Didn't he see that guy doing 90, right? We're blaming him. How do we see ourselves, by the way? Huh? Victim. We're unlucky. We got cut out of the herd. Today's not our lucky day. I shouldn't have daydreamed. I should have went another way, right? We got all those thoughts, right? We got all those. By the way, you think offenders think like that? Just different behavior. Who do they blame when they get caught? Police, right? They're unlucky. Should have went another way. It's not about what they did. All right, so there you are. You got your ticket. You are 30 miles up the road. You look down at your speedometer, and you're doing 75 again. What are the thoughts that allow you to speed again? It can't happen twice. Yeah, there's one. What's another one? Huh? Now what are you? Now you're really late, right? You know what I always think? I'll be a smarter speeder. I won't daydream. I'll get behind somebody with a radar detector, right? I think I'll outwit them, right? Again, offenders think like that, right? What do they think? What's the problem? The problem isn't what they did. The problem is they got caught. Now, that's a simple one. We all speed. But here's the final question. What are some thoughts that might get you to slow down a little bit? What are some thoughts I might plant that might get you to slow down? Less stress, leave earlier, right? Yeah, I didn't save any time. All right, what else? Yeah, it's safer. Are tickets free in New York? I don't know that. Are they free? Yeah. So the cost, insurance, points, right? Got to tell my spouse. All those things might get. How about this one? I want to be a good role model for my kids, right? They're in a car and I get pulled over speeding. That doesn't send the right message. The point is, to get you to slow down with this problem, I just have to change some of your thoughts. This is a simple problem. It's what we call a cognitive restructuring problem. I don't have to teach you a skill. Anybody can back off the pedal. All I have to do here is to get you to think a little different. See the consequences. Think about the benefits, all right? Think at what it costs and so forth. Most problems aren't that simple. I don't only have to change how you think, I have to show you how. All right? But that's a simple example for those of you that aren't familiar with CBT. That's kind of how it works. All right, what's the research say? Here's a meta-analysis. On average, CBT reduced recidivism 25%, but the most effective configurations found 50% reductions. What were those configurations? By the way, these are things that didn't matter. Setting, juvenile versus adult, minorities or females, or the brand name of the curriculum. It didn't make any difference. What did make a difference? Dosage, the risk principle. At least twice a week, increased effects. That's dosage, right? Implementation was monitored, staff were trained, that's fidelity, making sure it's done right. Higher proportion of completers, right? Why is that responsivity? Because we're taking away the barriers that people have to complete the program, right? Sometimes it's scheduling. Sometimes it's giving them bus tokens. Sometimes it's doing a program after school. Those kind of things can get in the way. Higher risk, the risk principle, and higher if it's combined with other services. We call that the need principle. I don't have time. I actually have a video, but I don't have time to play it. It would take too much time. But for the last several years now, we've been doing some work around the country, teaching mostly probation officers and case managers how to apply these core correctional practices. We call it EPICS, Effective Practices in Community Supervision. And here's why. This is what the research is telling us. Oftentimes, officer-youth interactions are often not effective because they're too brief. They focus on monitoring compliance rather than teaching them how to do it. The relationship's often confrontational. What's targeted is not always based on the assessment. And the more things you talk about, the less effective you are. So we've got some research that's telling us we can do a better job with supervision. Because it's the backbone. Let's face it, more kids are on probation than anywhere else. So if we can improve that, we can have a big effect. Okay? So what we do is we train them on following a structure. These are the 4 components. What's the research telling us? This is Ohio's study that included juveniles. We saw pretty good reductions. There's now enough research for a meta-analysis. And what did they find? It reduced recidivism about 13%. It's not meant to replace programs. It's meant to augment programs so that they're supporting the kind of things you're doing with kids in your programs. It helps bring together all of these evidence-based practices. So where are we at now? And let me tell you a little bit about this and kind of how it came about. I was doing some work out in Los Angeles, and there was no supervision being done once they came out of facilities. And I started thinking about some research that basically said that if you can identify mentors or people in the offender's life and train them, you can be more effective. And so we call it effective practices for community support for influencers. Okay? It includes training coaches. Basically, we train coaches. We don't train the influencers, we train the coaches. Okay? Why are we doing it? We want to build a pro-social network around the kid that actually have some skills. It increases the dosage, right? Because if you think about probation, and I don't know what you do here in New York, but I can tell you most places, if you're on probation, you're a kid on probation, you might come in a couple times a month for 30 minutes. That's a drop in the bucket. Okay? But think about if I could identify 3 kids in a kid's life, 3 people, and train them on some of these skills, and every time they saw the kid, they were working on a risky situation or a problem. I've increased the dosage dramatically. And we have research that says when you train others, it's 3 times more effective. So who are these influencers? Mentors, coaches, family members, friends, faith-based organizations, reentry coalitions, law enforcement, school officials, and significant others. One of our pilot sites is in Ohio, and it's through the court. It's down in southern Ohio, very hard-hit area by heroin and other problems. And we went down there and met with, they had their team together. They had law enforcement, court, the providers there. And we explained the model and how we would train them and so forth. And here's what really got my attention. The law enforcement folks said, we want to be trained in this. And I said, why? They said, well, we do after-school programs with kids. We do school resource officers. And we don't know what to do with these kids. Okay? And I thought, this is a great group. If I can get them trained as well, right? Now I've really expanded the network. So we're doing some studies now. We are starting to do a little training, but this is kind of where we're taking this to the next step. Fidelity, just very quick, making sure it's designed with integrity. This is some data from Washington State, and what it is showing you is even evidence-based programming. Here you go, functional family therapy. ART, which was developed here in New York, right, by Glick and Goldstein, significantly reduced recidivism when it was competently delivered. When they were not competently delivered, they increased recidivism rates. So you want to know why the principles are so important. You can spend a lot of money on this stuff, and if it's not being done well. Here's what they found looking at the competency of the therapist. If they were rated as not competent or marginally competent, they increased recidivism over the control group. It was only when they were competent and highly competent. And nobody wants to not do it right. But do you coach them? Do you have peer reviews? Do you sit in on groups, give them feedback? Do you tape groups and give them? I mean, these are good things that quality assurance should be done because you want everybody in your organization that touches a kid to have the same skills that many of you have. So what doesn't work? I got this from my friends in Oklahoma. It says, the Code of Tribal Wisdom says when you discover you're riding a dead horse, the best strategy is to dismount. However, in corrections, we try other strategies. Buy a stronger whip. Change riders. Say things like, this is the way we have always ridden this horse. Appoint a committee to study the horse. My favorite, everybody does this. Arrange to visit other sites to see how they ride dead horses. Create a training session to increase our riding ability. Harness several dead horses together for increased speed. Declare no horses too dead to beat. Provide additional funding to increase the horse's performance. Declare the horses better, faster, and cheaper dead. Study alternative uses for dead horses and promote the dead horse to a supervisory position. We talked about most of these already. I'm not gonna rehash them. A couple I think that are important. Here's one that really bothers me: vague, unstructured programs. Right? We have programs that say we do counseling. What the hell does that mean? Give me 5 counselors, I'll give you 5 approaches. Life skills. There's my favorite. What could be excluded in life skills? Nothing. It can be anything. Right? And so when you use these terms, define, if you're providing counseling, what model do you use? Is it cognitive behavioral? Do you follow a curriculum? What's the dosage? You need to put some substance behind your programming. If not, it's just vague term, doesn't tell us what you're doing, what you're targeting, how you're doing it, and that's how we get into trouble. Okay? So with that, I probably went too long anyway, but we got a little behind. I will answer questions before we take a break.